When I was a captain, the Army sent me to the Johnson Space Center in Houston for a couple days for a specific project. I'd been fascinated with the space program since I was a kid, and on this trip I got to meet a couple astronauts, see mission control, and had some really fascinating conversations about the space program in general. And one day, while having a cup of coffee in a small cafeteria, I had a conversation with a NASA employee who told me a remarkable story about the spacesuit that astronauts used to walk on the moon. To me, Project Apollo was an incredible achievement. President Kennedy decided to go to the moon at a time when we basically had 1950s technology, and the entire effort was a Herculean challenge in terms of research and development and complex program management. And I think in many ways, achieving the goal as fast as we did was probably a lot harder than most people realize. And like most big challenges, the Apollo program had a bunch of smaller sub-stories where individuals and small organizations achieved things that seemed impossible at the time. And as I learned that day in the Johnson Space Center cafeteria, the development of the spacesuit, the white suit you see in pictures of astronauts walking on the moon, is one of those remarkable sub-stories. This story begins in 1901 when Abram Spinell was born in Odessa on the Black Sea. A few years later, his parents moved to Paris, and then when he was 10, his family moved to Rochester, New York. Spinell went to college for a couple of years, but never finished. Instead, recognizing that electric vacuum cleaners were really taking off in the U.S., he invented a flexible garment bag that could be used with a vacuum cleaner to store clothes, and in the process, he founded the Vacuumizer Manufacturing Company. In 1932, he expanded his vision and founded the International Latex Corporation that basically made undergarments. Depending on how old you are, you may have heard of one of their products, the Playtex Living Bra. It was famous back in the 1960s. Starting with nothing and building a big company is quite an achievement by itself, but the story gets even better. In the late 1950s, Spinell had an interesting conversation with his TV repairman, a guy named Lenny Shepard, and it was a conversation that took them down a completely different path. This was a time when TVs were big boxes that still used vacuum tubes. Occasionally a tube would fail, and you needed to have somebody come to your house and replace the tube. While Shepard, the repairman, worked on the TV, he suggested to Spinell that the International Latex Corporation, or ILC, consider making spacesuits for the new manned space program. Since ILC already made flexible clothing, it seemed logical to him that they move into making spacesuits. Spinell, the ultimate entrepreneur, liked the idea, but he wanted the TV repairman to come run the program. Shepard agreed, and they started the Special Products Division of ILC and started working on spacesuits. And to help with the effort, they brought in George Durney, a trained car mechanic that at the time was selling sewing machines at Sears. They also had a group of really experienced seamstresses who ultimately ended up playing a pretty pivotal role. They had some initial success in developing suits, but they weren't able to obtain contracts in the early years of the manned space effort, during the Mercury and Gemini programs in the early to mid-1960s. The big opportunity surfaced when Kennedy said we were going to the moon, and we needed a spacesuit that protected astronauts in that harsh environment. The conventional wisdom at the time was that one of the major defense or major space companies with extensive R&D capability and a large administrative staff able to run a complex government project would likely get the moonsuit contract. A smaller company that essentially made women's underwear wasn't seen as being credible. Also, many people felt that the suit would need to be fairly rigid, almost robot-like, to adequately protect the astronauts in the environment on the moon. As the process progressed, NASA decided that two established companies, Hamilton Standard and the David Clark Company, both great companies with really solid reputations, they would compete for the moonsuit. ILC had added engineers and matured their organization, but they would not be in the competition for the contract. But Spinell, Shepard, and Durney didn't give up, and they petitioned to be part of the competition. And using their experience in flexible clothing, leveraging their group of expert seamstresses, and being incredibly innovative, They designed the best suit, the most flexible suit, and ultimately they won the competition. It actually looks like this. This is the ILC A7L spacesuit. When you look at a picture of an astronaut on the moon in the white suit, the white covering is actually a protective overgarment that goes over this, the A7L suit. So the next time you see a picture of an Apollo astronaut on the moon, think back to how a kid from Odessa came to the United States, built a big successful company from the ground up, took on the challenge of making spacesuits, and then against all odds, and with a lot of gumption and a lot of creativity, and working with a TV repairman and a car mechanic, they gave us this, which allowed us to do this. I think this is a great story. I also believe it can only happen here in the United States.